Burhan says that displaced civilians seek safety in government-controlled areas amidst ongoing conflicts. Netanyahu refuses pardon in corruption trials and calls proceedings ridiculous and focuses on national security. Syria reopens embassy in London, marking return to international diplomacy after years of isolation.
I think something needs to be done.
Sudan's Sovereign Council Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan said that civilians displaced by the conflict chose to move to government-controlled areas in search of safety and basic living conditions. Meanwhile, the Sudanese army continued airstrikes on Rapid Support Forces (RSF) positions near Naila Airport in South Darfur and in West Kordofan. The military said its air defenses shot down all drones launched by the RSF to attack the 19th Infantry Division, Mirio Airport and Mirio Dam in northern Sudan. The conflict, ongoing since April 2023, has killed thousands and displaced millions amidst stalled peace efforts. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasized the need to stop external support for the Rapid Support Forces in Sudan following the meeting of the G7 foreign ministers in Canada, where the Sudanese crisis was discussed. Rubio stated that he would support Senate efforts to designate the RSF as a terrorist organization if it would help and end the crisis. However, he mentioned that he had not reviewed the proposal. He added that the RSF has agreed to a ceasefire proposal backed by the United States, but with no intention of adhering to it.
Malnutrition and suffering that they're seeing from some of these people who have been able to flee is unprecedented.
The Sudanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs expressed its welcome of the statements made by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio regarding the situation in Sudan. The ministry said that Rubio's remarks send a strong message to other countries following the Sudan peace process, emphasizing that it is time to hold the Rapid Support Forces militia accountable. Spokesperson for the Red Cross in Sudan reported the arrival of a large number of displaced people in Tawila locality, describing the situation as catastrophic. The spokesperson stated that the Red Cross has provided family communication services in Tawila and is working to support local residents while urging international organizations to respond to the country's worsening humanitarian crisis. The European Commission warned of a severe humanitarian crisis in Sudan, describing cities like El Fasher as grave of humanity, while announcing €273 million in aid for 2025 to support civilians affected by the ongoing conflict. EU spokesperson for humanitarian aid, Eva, highlighted the targeting of hospitals, blockade, and the thousands of civilians' deaths. The EU is providing emergency assistance, including shelter, clean water, food, medical care, and psychological support for displaced populations in Sudan and neighboring countries. Implemented with local and international partners, these efforts aim to protect civilians and ensure aid reaches those in urgent need amidst one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. African Union Commissioner Mahmoud Ali Yusuf has warned today that Sudan is on the brink of a dangerous collapse, stressing that the suffering of its people is receiving little global attention. Following a meeting with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Yusuf described Sudan's war as one of Africa's most violent and complex crises. Both leaders reaffirmed strong AU-UN cooperation, especially on the silencing the guns initiative to end African conflicts by 2030. Guterres voiced deep concern over atrocities in al-Fasher, growing violence in Kordofan, and instability across the Sahel, warning the world not to turn its back on Africa.
Being disrupted by conflict, climate change, energy prices ensured the safe passage of over 32 million metric tons of food commodities from Ukrainian ports.
And for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by international relations expert Dr. Mohammed Osman, a very distinguished guest. Welcome to Qnews, sir, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today in the analysis. Sir, well, what is your comment on the United States Secretary of State's statements regarding the rapid support forces and the situation in Sudan?
Thank you for having me, Rana. It seems that the United States is escalating its verbal criticism of the rapid support forces in Sudan, of course, on account of their heinous actions in the past few weeks, the massacre of thousands of civilians, the displacement of tens of thousands of civilians, and the humanitarian crisis they have caused in the city of Al-Fasher and its vicinity. In Darfur, it seems that the United States now is in a position where it is attempting to push forward for a ceasefire that is being proposed, a humanitarian truce, by the quartet, which is composed of Egypt, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. And they wish to see a cessation of hostilities in Sudan as soon as possible to alleviate the human suffering. However, today, Marco Rubio did accuse the RSF that they are not sincere, even they are willing to actually commit to a truce of any sorts. If anything, the RSF is attempting to advance in other parts of Darfur, which they basically control most of the Darfur's 4 provinces now, and now they are pushing forward in the Kordofan province.
Why did Marco Rubio make this accusation, Dr. Mohammed, in light of the United States working hard on a ceasefire? Isn't this contradicting?
Not really, Rana, because the United States, Marco Rubio did explicitly say that that the RSF is not serious about a ceasefire so far, because that their actions on the ground do not reflect any intention to commit to a ceasefire. The rapid support forces, it seems, Rana, do have this desire to wrest control over the entirety of Western Sudan. They have failed miserably in capturing Khartoum in a battle that lasted over a year. They were soundly defeated by the Sudanese armed forces and Sudan's legitimate government, so their forces withdrew westwards and were attempting to consolidate, and now they are attempting to control the entirety of Western Sudan, the strategic Darfur region, which is very rich in resources, and it is the hometown of the RSF leadership and rank and file as well, that they come from the Arab tribes of Darfur mostly, and they also want to control parts of the strategic areas of Kordofan, so that this would basically, in case of a ceasefire, they want to have control over West Sudan, so that there would be this situation very similar, for example, to what's going on in Yemen and in Libya, for example, where there is a de facto situation where there are 2 governments, basically, one enjoying international support, the other unrecognized, but what happens on the ground is de facto partition. So this is what Hamidti, or Hamdan Dagalo, the leader of the RSF, is pushing for at the moment, it seems, because he understands that he cannot control the entirety of Sudan anymore, that he cannot take over the governing of Sudan, because basically the armed forces are putting up a very strong fight, and they are supported by most of the segments of Sudanese society. So he's finding that very hard to achieve. The United States can see through those designs, and therefore they have directed these harsh criticisms. However, the United States, on the other hand, has not taken any concrete actions to pressure the RSF. They have not applied enough sanctions. They have not applied enough pressure. They even put sanctions on the Sudanese army as well as the RSF, and not only the RSF. So, of course, this raises questions because there is no equivalence between the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces. And the problem is that some powers in the world still do deal with those two warring factions in Sudan as equals, as two people who have a legitimate claim, while the reality on the ground says that there is a legitimate government and a legitimate army and a rogue militia called the RSF that is basically attempting to grab power and take over Sudan by force.
Dr. Mohammed, do you read, or what's your narrative? Is there a possibility of a near end to what's taking place in Sudan at this point, which is catastrophic?
There are indications that a ceasefire might be pushed forward. The quartet is attempting to push the ceasefire forward. However, the RSF, as I just said, is not really serious about committing to a ceasefire. They see that they need to consolidate themselves in Western Sudan and control its entirety before they enter into any future ceasefire. And on the other hand, the Sudanese army is very adamant on the fact that it insists on a military solution to this crisis, and they do believe that they have what it takes and they have the necessary resources to defeat the RSF and wrest control back of the areas in Sudan that the RSF controls, which unfortunately does not reflect the reality, because the Sudanese army has been defeated in Al-Fashir and in Western Sudan, and even in Kordofan they are facing severe difficulties in maintaining control of many of the towns they actually control at the moment. So it seems that both parties do not see themselves in a situation where they have exhausted all of their options so that they would sit on the negotiating table and agree to a ceasefire. However, if the international and regional powers exert enough effort on both the Sudanese army and the RSF, and especially the RSF, maybe then we might see a ceasefire soon. So it is very possible that we might see it in the near future, but it will require substantial amounts of pressure that are non-existent right now, especially from actors and mediators such as the United States.
What about the humanitarian aid, sir?
The humanitarian situation, Rama, is catastrophic. The conflict in Sudan, we can easily argue that it is one of the worst conflicts of the 21st century in Africa and in the world. The war has been going on now for over 2 years, about 2.5 years. 150,000 people at least have lost their lives. We have millions of displaced, whether internally or externally, as refugees. There is a dire humanitarian catastrophe. Hundreds of thousands of people died of famine, according to the UN estimates. 500,000 children died of malnutrition and famine in Sudan over the past 2.5 years, in addition to the 150,000 who died due to combat operations, most of them civilians. We have seen also the dire humanitarian situation in Al-Fashir.
Horrific, sir.
Yes, horrific. 2,000 civilians at least were massacred within a few hours, including 460 people in the Saudi hospital. 100,000 people are trapped inside the city and prevented by the RSF from leaving, and the tens of thousands who have been displaced are finding difficulties in reaching areas controlled by the Sudanese army due to the attacks conducted repeatedly by the RSF. The RSF is conducting acts of genocide in Darfur against the African ethnic groups, Rana, the Zaghawa, the Fur, the Masalit. They are subjected to horrendous massacres. And this is not the first. For example, in Al Geneina, in June 2023, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights documented the massacre of 15,000 civilians of these
Dr. Osman, because I have to wrap up now in 10 seconds. How do you read and elaborate, and what's your narrative about Egypt's role and efforts in this catastrophic situation that's taking place? And is Egypt working hard on this?
Egypt is playing a very positive role. It is a member of the quartet, which seeks to resolve the Sudanese conflict. Egypt maintains connections and channels of dialogue with all the parties in the Sudanese conflict, and also with all the Sudanese political forces. Egypt hosted many conferences between the Sudanese political forces and factions to find a solution and a roadmap ahead for a solution in Sudan. And also Egypt supports the humanitarian efforts to alleviate the humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan. So Egypt is playing one of the most responsible roles in Sudan in comparison to many other countries who even pretend that the war in Sudan does not exist. They would rather pay attention to Ukraine or even to wars in the Middle East, but they choose to turn a blind eye on this dire humanitarian catastrophe, horrendous catastrophe in Sudan, Rana.
Dr. Mohammed Osman from Cairo, international relations expert. Thank you very much for your informative knowledge, intellectual, of course, knowledge, and for your time on top of all, for joining Qnews in this very special, in-depth analysis. And now we move on to the latest developments in Gaza.
And then, of course, we have the host tonight. And I just want to thank you very much. It was a reason we chose Egypt, because you were very helpful and very, very helpful. Everybody wanted to have this, but we really thought it was appropriate. And you are a great leader. And he's a fantastic man and a fantastic general, by the way. But he's a great, great president. And I want to thank Egypt and all of your representatives for treating us all so well. Thank you very much.
Hamas has claimed it has completed the first phase of its ceasefire with Israel, while the second phase and Gaza's future remain unresolved. Official Osama Hamdan called the deal a preliminary agreement and warned that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's Greater Israel vision threatens regional stability. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said work on a provisional constitution and election laws is almost done, with polls planned once the conflict ends. Since the truce began on October the 10th, some progress has been made on hostage remains and suspending major Israeli operations. The Red Cross facilitated the return of 300 Palestinian and 23 Israeli bodies. Hamas has called for international support for Gaza's education system, urging countries and organizations to help students, schools and universities continue their studies amidst the ongoing conflict. In a Telegram post, the group praised recent high school graduates for achieving excellence despite the harsh and horrific conditions of the war, describing education as central to the Palestinian struggle for freedom and a brighter future. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he will not request a pardon in his ongoing corruption trial if it implies admitting guilt, describing the proceedings as ridiculous and emphasizing his focus on national and regional issues. In an interview, Netanyahu criticized the trial for harming both Israeli and U.S. interests, noting that he spends 3 days in a week in a court while managing national security and peace initiatives. Facing bribery, fraud and breach of trust charges across 3 separate cases, he insisted he would not formally seek a pardon under any condition suggesting guilt. He also commented on U.S. political figures asserting openness to dialogue if they improve their knowledge on key issues. Turkey has called on the planned International Stabilization Force, the RSF, in Gaza to provide last guarantees for the fragile ceasefire. Speaking in Ankara, officials also stressed that the US-led Civil Military Coordination Center must ensure unhindered humanitarian aid deliveries in line with international law. Turkey, a vocal critique of Israel's actions in Gaza, has expressed interest in joining the ISF despite Israel's objections. The force, proposed under a UN draft resolution, would secure Gaza, protect civilians, aid deliveries, and support a Palestinian police force. The Palestinian Ministry of Awqaf and Religious Affairs has condemned what it called a heinous crime after settlers set fire to parts of El Hajj Hamdan Mosque, located between Kafi Haris and Deir Istia in the occupied West Bank and defaced with its racist graffiti. The Palestinian Ministry of Awqaf and Religious Affairs condemned the arson attack on El Hajj in the mosque at the West Bank, calling it barbarism deriving by Israeli racist incitement and a blatant assault on Muslims. It warned that no place of worship is safe amidst ongoing shelter and Israeli forces attacks, which it said violate international laws protecting freedom of worship. The ministry urged Islamic and Arab countries, as well as the organizations of Islamic cooperation, to act to stop such violations. The Ministry of Health in the Gaza Strip announced that the death toll from the Israeli genocide has risen to 69,187, with 107,703 others injured. The ministry stated that hospitals in Gaza received 2 martyrs over the past 24 hours, 1 recovered from under the rubble and another newly killed, in addition to 5 wounded Palestinians, without specifying the circumstances of the deaths or how the injuries took place. The UNRWA reported that more than 282,000 homes in the Gaza Strip have been destroyed or damaged, leaving large numbers of residents displaced and without safe shelter. In a post on the platform X, the agency said that thousands of families are currently living amidst the rubble in the tents that lack adequate space, privacy and basic services as the approaching winter season worsens their humanitarian suffering. Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam said that reform is first a national priority and not just an international obligation, noting the government's progress on key measures including the financial gap bill. Salam met with French President Macron's political advisor, highlighting Lebanon's ongoing efforts to strengthen financial controls and finalize legislation to be sent to parliament. Legendre reaffirmed France's support for Lebanon's reforms and negotiations with the International Monetary Fund. The meeting also addressed security in southern Lebanon amidst Israeli attacks, with both sides stressing the importance of regional stability and close Lebanese-French coordination. The Israeli occupation army has launched airstrikes early today on several areas in southern Lebanon, mainly targeting the valley and the Tyre district. The strikes damaged several resorts and blockade parts of the Latania River. According to the National News Agency, another strike hit the town of Beit Jibilia district, specifically in the Qanouk area. Lebanon's National Litani River Authority began on-site inspections to clear the river and prevent flooding that could endanger nearby communities and farmland. The attacks come despite a ceasefire deal that took effect on November the 27th, with Israel accused of over 4,500 violations since then. Lebanese Foreign Minister Youssef Raji stressed the importance of halting Israeli attacks and the immediate withdrawal from southern Lebanon. During his meeting with the French president's advisor, the Lebanese Foreign Minister reaffirmed the Lebanese government commitment to the decision of limiting weapons to its own hands and withdrawing them from Hezbollah. Syrian Foreign Minister Assad Shibani announced the reopening of Syria's embassy in London, marking a return to international diplomacy after years of isolation. During his official visit to the United Kingdom, Shibani raised the Syrian flag at the embassy and met with members of the Syrian community in London. He described the reopening as a restoration of Syria's global presence with its free identity, emphasizing the end of years of diplomatic isolation imposed under the Assad regime. A coalition led by Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani came first in the parliamentary election. The Independent High Electoral Commission reported a 56.11% turnout and said the preliminary results covered 99.74% of votes. In Baghdad, the Reconstruction and Development Coalition received 411,026 votes, followed by Taqadum Progress Party with 284,109 votes. No single party can form a government in Iraq's 329-seat parliament, meaning coalition building will be key in deciding the next prime minister. Iran has opened a missile exhibition in Tehran to mark Aerospace Week. The display at the IRGC Aerospace Force Museum featured missiles, drones, and other military equipment. General Bilali, overseeing the exhibition, said the missiles are essential in all areas of ground-to-ground warfare. The Kremlin has said that Ukraine would eventually have to negotiate with Russia, warning that Kyiv's position was worsening daily as fighting continues in the east. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that Moscow remained open to a political and diplomatic settlement, but would keep fighting to protect Russia's security if no such opportunity arose. Peskov said that Ukraine would eventually have to negotiate, but from a much weaker position. Russia has said that forces are advancing towards Pokrovsk in Donetsk, including the northwestern and eastern districts, while repelling 9 Ukrainian attacks in a single day. In Kharkiv, Russian troops attacked encircled Ukrainian units and seized settlements in Zaporozhye. Ukraine reported 217 combat engagements along the front in the past 24 hours, repelling dozens of Russian offensives in areas including Pokrovsk and destroying armored vehicles, rocket launchers, and air defense systems. Ukrainian forces also struck the Strarolon, a factory in Russia's Crimea, a key supplier of military equipment, causing explosions and fires. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin, but before we wrap up, here's a recap of the top stories making headlines this hour. El Bohran says that displaced civilians seek safety in government-controlled areas amidst ongoing conflict. Netanyahu refuses pardon in corruption trial and calls proceedings ridiculous and focuses on national security. Syria reopens embassy in London, marking return to international diplomacy after years of isolation. For more stories and live updates, follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG. From all of us here, thank you very much for watching and stay tuned for more updates and analysis on Qnews. For today, it's goodbye. This ends our transmission until we meet again tomorrow at 4 p.m. car local time. Thank you very much for watching and goodbye again.